I was told America was slow, disorganized, weak. I believed every word. Berlin, early 1942. Our intelligence briefings painted the United States as a nation of soft workers and primitive factories. Their automakers built flashy cars, not real machines of war. The Führer insisted that German engineering stood unmatched. I was chosen to prove it. My name is Marcus Adler. Though that is not the name on my American papers. To them, I am Michael Adams, a simple German-American immigrant, an industrial technician looking for work in Detroit. But to the Abwehr, the German military intelligence, I am Agent 72, sent to uncover how America intends to arm itself. Because we could already feel the tide shifting. After Pearl Harbor, the United States had awakened. Suddenly they were mobilizing at a speed that terrified our high command. Rumors spread within the Reich that a single automobile company, Ford Motor Company, was planning a bomber factory to dwarf anything we had ever seen. A factory to build the B-24 Liberator, a flying fortress of aluminum and fire, 10 machine guns, 8,800 pounds of bombs, 285 miles per hour, 2,100-mile range. If they could produce even one per day, it would be a nightmare for Germany. But the Americans claimed they would produce one every 63 minutes. We refused to believe it. So I was sent to find out the truth. Detroit looked nothing like the propaganda had portrayed it. It was not a city of soft drinkers and lazy shopkeepers. Everywhere, smoke, steel, marching workers, the echo of hammers. An army without uniforms. I followed my instructions. No camera, no map, no radio. Just memory and caution. My target was only 30 miles west. A rural field near Ypsilanti, Michigan. The name, Willow Run. To the public. It was just a construction project. To us. It was the most dangerous building in America to reach. I had to blend in among thousands of workers flooding the automotive plants. Most of them had family in Europe, Poles, Slovaks, Hungarians, Czechs. They worked fiercely, with something burning behind their eyes. I had studied their language, their mannerisms, but I did not understand their determination. One man told me, "We will build every plane faster than Hitler can shoot them down." He said it with pride and with anger. That frightened me more than any weapon. I applied for a technical job through a civilian contractor. They needed men. Too many factories, not enough hands. The Americans called it the arsenal of democracy. Germany had underestimated this place. While Berlin argued about production quotas, Detroit multiplied them. Ford's assembly line genius was being unshackled. Mass production, interchangeable parts, endless shifts. Factories lit up all night like battlefields. Women hammering rivets. Teenagers welding aluminum frames. Old mechanics retrained to build engines of war. No marching band, no indoctrination. Just work. Work beyond exhaustion. By the end of my first week, I understood the danger. There were too many of them. Too much power. Too much steel. I finally saw it for myself. Willow Run. It stretched into the horizon, a mile-long factory, the largest in the world. Inside those walls, they planned to turn 1.5 million parts into bombers, faster than our ships could stop them, and the most terrifying part, it wasn't even finished yet. I filed my first coded report. Americans building massive aircraft plant. Production capacity far exceeds estimates. Immediate. Countermeasures recommended. Berlin replied, continue surveillance. Confirm claims of 1 bomber per hour. They still did not believe their own intelligence. So I went deeper. I studied train routes delivering aluminum and Pratt & Whitney engines. I counted fuel tankers, rail spurs, supply convoys. I memorized the shifts, the badge colors, the guard rotations. I even learned the faces of the engineers, the geniuses behind the assembly line. What they were building could end us, but I did not dare write that yet. Instead, I wrote, Americans are fast, too fast. Night after night, I returned to my rented room. The floorboards creaked like depth charges. Every knock on the door made my pulse jump. Espionage is not courage. It is fear kept quiet. I tore my reports into microscopic pieces, flushed them into sewers, mailed coded summaries disguised as postcards. Back in Berlin, they still whispered that America was weak. But they had never walked into Willow Run. They had never seen thousands of workers marching into a factory like soldiers going over the top. They had never heard the thunder of engines rolling off assembly lines like artillery. They had never watched aluminum wings come alive under sparks that I had. And I knew, if they succeed here, Germany will lose the war. I stared at the unfinished bomber line, a steel serpent waiting to awaken. One banker publicly mocked Ford's plan. You can't build bombers like you build Model Ts. But when I saw crates of pre-cut ribs and stamped panels arriving, I knew he was wrong. They were going to do it. They were going to flood the skies. And there was only one question left. How fast? That answer would haunt the Reich, because what I discovered next, Berlin refused to accept. But it was already too late. This was not just a factory. This was the beginning of the end, and I was standing on the doorstep, watching our defeat being assembled, one bomber at a time. The first completed wing section rolled past me on a Monday morning. The crowd of workers cheered as if they were sending a rocket to the moon. I forced myself to clap, too. No one noticed my hesitation. I hoped it was February 1943. Before this day, Willow Run had been only promises, steel beams, and blueprints pinned to walls. Now it was alive. I followed the newly built fuselage section as it traveled down the line. Motors hummed. Rivet guns snapped like machine fire. The smell of oil and hot aluminum settled into my clothes. I had spent months mapping every corner of this facility. It still overwhelmed me. The building was so long that they had to install turns in the assembly line, because if it had been straight, the workers would have ended up in another county. Only America could build something that outgrew their own land. The Germans believed factories were sacred and precise, small armies of craftsmen perfecting machines. But this was chaos, controlled only by relentless motion. Any part could be swapped. Any worker could step in. No delays. No excuses. That efficiency terrified me. Berlin wanted weakness. I searched for it. And I found some. Engines overheated. Tail sections didn't align. Rivets broke under stress. Ford engineers argued loudly, red-faced, sweating like men in a trench under fire. But instead of stopping, they adapted, they changed tools, they revised techniques, they solved. In Berlin, an engineer would blame a supplier. Here, they blamed time. Because time was the enemy. And they were determined to beat it. American workers carried photographs in their pockets. Sons in uniform, brothers in the Pacific, cousins flying over Europe. For them, the war was not an ocean away. It was personal. One woman told me, "My husband is in the Marines. I promised I'd build a plane that brings him home." She riveted with the speed of desperation. How could we match that? Then, something changed. In late March, production suddenly doubled. The line sped up and didn't slow down. The first fully assembled B-24 Liberator rolled out of the factory doors, silver skin, deadly shape. 4 engines ready to tear open the sky. They named it the Spirit of Willow Run. The factory shook with celebration. Flags waved. Cameras flashed. Henry Ford's son, Edsel, smiled like a general overseeing a victory parade. I stood in the back. One spy surrounded by thousands of Americans, clapping for a machine that would kill my countrymen. For the first time, I felt a sharp sting inside. Guilt? Confusion? Fear? I wasn't sure which. Then another thought struck me. This is only the beginning. I walked the entire length of the line that night, step by step, bomber by bomber. Each station meant destruction for Germany. Nose turret installation, bomb racks locked into place, a fuel tank sealed, navigation systems calibrated, twin .50 caliber guns mounted in the waist, Tail assembly riveted shut in gun positions. Point 8. 800 pounds of explosives. A flying threat every hour. I wrote in my secret log. The assembly line has learned to breathe. Productivity rising faster than predicted. Urgent escalation of German anti-bomber tactics required. But even that was too optimistic, because the numbers kept rising. And so did morale. The Americans were starting to believe they could win. I found one crack in their armor. Quality. Many planes required later modifications. Some early B-24s failed tests due to rushed work. Yet, the Americans hardly cared. One foreman said, "If one plane is weak, then we build two." Quantity was their weapon. Berlin worshipped perfection. Detroit worshipped output. If one bomber drops its bombs, the results matter more than flawless welding. That truth hit me like a punch. We could produce masterpieces. Panthers, Tigers, MG-42s, symbols of engineering excellence. But America produced a flood, and floods do not ask permission. They drown you. I saw production goals written on chalkboards. 14 per day, 300 per month, 3,600 per year. That number froze me in place. Our entire Luftwaffe command would tremble to hear it. How do you shoot down a sky full of metal when your gun's empty and the planes still keep coming? And then, a whispered rumor passed through the halls. A new goal. One bomber every 63 minutes. I reported this immediately. Berlin replied only with scorn. Impossible. Americans lie for propaganda effect. But I stood there. I watched the minutes tick by. I saw the line accelerate. They weren't lying. We had lied to ourselves. Later that night, the plant manager gave a speech to the workers. "You are building the wings of freedom. Every plane rolling out that door will shorten this war." Cheers thundered like artillery. They believed him. Every word and belief, I realized, is more powerful than fear. I left Willow Run under a moonlit sky. Train whistles echoed in the dark. Smoke rose like storm clouds over the factory. Each plume, another nail in Germany's coffin. And I had thought I was sent here to destroy American production. But watching that endless river of metal, I understood a harsh truth. Nothing could stop it. Not sabotage. Not bombing raids. Not disbelief from Berlin. The arsenal of democracy was awake. And now, it was hungry. This was a war of machines, and we were already losing. But I could not admit that. Not yet. Because tomorrow, I would discover something even worse. The more I learned, the more dangerous my mission became. By April 1943, Berlin demanded more than numbers. They wanted weakness. Something they could exploit. Something to break this machine before it broke Germany. I searched everywhere. In the blueprints, in the workshops, in late-night conversations where workers cursed the pressure. But a sickening realization crept in. The greatest strength of Willow Run wasn't the factory. It was the people. Most German leaders believed Americans were soft. Too wealthy, too comfortable, too lazy to endure hardship here. I found the opposite. I watched a man with only 3 fingers hammering rivets faster than anyone else. He lost the others at Pearl Harbor. I saw a young boy, maybe 16, pushing crates of ammunition. A draft card in his pocket, a uniform in his future, and the women ran half the factory. Riveting teams of welders, instrument calibration, tire mounting, turret assembly. Every Rosie the Riveter poster was real. Every smiling face hid a burning anger. They were fighting for someone who never came home. How do you defeat a nation where every mother is a soldier? One evening I followed 2 engineers to a quiet corner near Hangar 5. They spoke in low voices, looking over diagrams. A new design for the B-24's turret controls. Easier to repair mid-combat. Less likely to jam under rapid fire. That improvement alone, could save hundreds of American crews. I tried to memorize the drawings. But my attention drifted to something else, the fear in their voices. Not fear of Germany, fear of failing an aircrew depending on them. That moment, I envied the Americans. Their engineers had a purpose greater than medals or ideology. They were building survival. I sent my daily encrypted report. Morale remains unstoppable, production up 28% in 6 weeks. Women constitute 35% of labor, highly efficient. Recommend extreme caution. U.S. capacity is accelerating beyond projections. Berlin's response came cold. Focus on sabotage opportunities. I wanted to scream. There were none. The system was built to survive failure. Parts interchangeable, tools duplicated to workers, cross-trained supervisors everywhere. You could destroy a section of the line, and they would simply reroute around it. Like cutting one branch from a tree, the trunk still stands. Security tightened each week. Armed guards at entrances, background checks expanded, documents locked behind steel doors. The Americans suspected spies. They just didn't know they had already found one. I felt their eyes linger. Questions came sharper. Badges checked twice. One slip, one wrong word. I would vanish into a prison cell or a shallow pit. Then came the night that nearly ended me. I was copying a maintenance report, engine performance figures, when a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. A guard, tall, stern, silent. He motioned toward the exit. No words, no explanation. My heart pounded hard enough to shake my uniform. Had they found my radio codes? My microfilm camera? The guard opened a small door beside the loading bay. I prepared for death. Instead, I heard cheering. Dozens of workers gathered around a chalkboard. A number written large. 93 minutes. A plane, nearly ready. Only the wingtips unfinished. The guard smiled and clapped me on the back. We're gonna hit 63 soon. You'll want to see that. I forced a laugh, though my hands shook. I had never been so afraid to stay alive. Later, alone in the barracks, sleep never came. The truth pressed on my chest like weight from the heavens. Germany had underestimated America. We didn't understand them at all. We thought industry meant steel, coal, machines, but here, industry meant belief. Belief that freedom was worth building for. Belief that sacrifice meant victory. Belief that every bomber leaving this field carried hope for peace. How do you fight? Belief? With speeches? With fear? Neither could stop Willow Run. I remembered what Berlin said early in the war. The Americans can build refrigerators, not bombers. Well, they were building bombers like refrigerators. Fast, simple, reliable by the thousands. The nightmare had begun, and it was only accelerating. I stared at my forged identity papers. One decision could change everything. Expose myself to warn Berlin, or stay and gather more. I told myself the Reich depended on me. That duty demanded courage, but deep inside, a question I dared not speak. What if we are the villains? What if this arsenal is the world's last hope for ending the war? I pushed the thought away. I had a job to do. Tomorrow, I would walk the factory floor again. A spy among heroes. A saboteur among saviors. And the clock would tick ever faster toward 63, toward the moment the floodgates would burst open and the skies above Germany would grow dark with wings. We were close, too close. Every day, the chalkboard numbers dropped. 89 minutes, 82 minutes, 75 minutes. America was learning faster than we could fight. Engineers from Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, even refrigerator factories, all working together. Competitors turned allies. Capitalists turned soldiers of steel. It terrified me. Berlin demanded details. How soon until they reach 1 bomber per hour? I answered honestly, weeks, not months. They didn't believe me. They never believed what they didn't want to hear. So I kept sending proof. Assembly line photos, production logs to workforce rosters, fuel and aluminum shipments, and new airfields under construction in England, but the real weapon wasn't numbers. It was momentum. Once the Americans discovered a weakness, they fixed it within days. When landing gear fittings cracked, they redesigned the bolt. When hydraulic lines leaked, they rerouted and reinforced. When welds failed, they trained. Hundreds more welders. Each flaw made them stronger. Germany, on the other hand, hid its mistakes. Pride was killing us. I shadowed a senior engineer, harried at a humble man, always wiping grease on his overused rag. He treated me kindly, offering cigarettes and conversation. He spoke of his 2 sons. One training with the Navy .1 already buried in France. Every bolt I tighten, he said, I do it so some other father doesn't have to bury his kid. There was no hatred in his voice, just sorrow sharpened into purpose. How could I report that as weakness? Fuel lines arrived pre-cut. Wing ribs stamped by machine presses. Prefabricated tail units sliding down tracks, and no more craftsmen spending weeks hand-building a bomber. This was war by conveyor belt. The Luftwaffe couldn't shoot them down fast enough. For every B-24 destroyed in combat, 6 more rolled out to replace it. And everyone carried 10 young Americans who believed they would end this war. Rumors spread. The target wasn't just Germany. It was Berlin itself. A bombing campaign so devastating that the Reich would crumble under its own ashes. I imagined the city. My city. In flames. My family beneath collapsing buildings. My friends vaporized in the firestorm. Was that my fault? Was I helping build our own destruction? By trying to stop it. The first B-24 to break the 70-minute mark was celebrated like a moon landing. Workers cheered. Bands played. The newspapers called Willow Run the factory that won't sleep. Even Roosevelt mentioned it on radio. We are building the weapons of freedom faster than tyranny can destroy them. It felt like a prophecy, and I was working against it. Every night, I stared at the tiny vial in my locker. A chemical agent, harmless in small amounts, but devastating if poured into coolant tanks. A sabotage plan authorized by Berlin .1 splash into the right machinery. And the assembly line would halt for weeks. It would be so easy. Slip the vial from my coat. Twist open a cap. Walk away. A silent victory for the fatherland, and no one would ever know. Except me. Before I could act, America crossed the threshold. A crowd gathered at the chalkboard. Men and women packed shoulder to shoulder. Clock ticking, sweat dripping, voices whispering. Is this the day? The supervisor raised his hand. A siren wailed, and the number changed. 63 minutes, 1,000 voices erupted. Confetti streamed from overhead cranes. Journalists took photos. Families hugged. Workers cried. The United States had achieved the impossible .1 bomber. Every hour, every day, every night, until the war ended. The flood was unleashed. I fled to the restroom and locked the door. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The vial fell from my pocket. Glass shattered. The chemicals spilled across the tiles. Harmless on concrete, the saboteur's last chance. Destroyed. I sank to the floor. Was this failure or salvation? That night, I wrote my most chilling report yet. German defeat now inevitable unless Willow Run is destroyed completely. As I sealed the message, I whispered a truth I dared not admit. I didn't want Willow Run destroyed, because amidst the roar of engines and rivet guns, I had discovered something stronger than fear. Hope that humans could build, not just destroy. Hope that someday, this place would no longer construct bombers, but homes. The Americans celebrated through the night, and I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could pretend to be the enemy, and not become the betrayer. The clock was ticking, toward an invasion, toward a firestorm, toward a reckoning, and my war was just beginning. I remember the morning light like a question. Sun through the factory windows made the rivet lines glow. Conveyor belts hummed like veins pumping metal life. The B-24 fuselage rolled forward, a slow promise of power. Inside my pocket, the memory of sabotage still weighed on me. The shattered vial was gone, but the guilt stayed sharp. The assembly line. An engine roared to life. Workers cheered. Someone slapped someone else on the back. These men named engines after wives, sisters, sweethearts. Giving metal a heartbeat, a young American Joe handed me a lunch packet. From my ma, he smiled. She says, "Eat more, you'll feel like you belong." The note inside said, "Eat steady. Keep warm. We wait for you to write." Simple words, universal hope. Later we heard distant sirens, England again under attack. Men paused, crossed themselves, then kept working. War demanded busy hands. That evening, 10 bombers didn't return. A board updated the losses, numbers replacing lives. Someone's neighbor, someone's son. The machine of war swallowed everything. Reports still passed through my hands. I tried steering them toward safety, not ruin. Delayed a shipment here. Flagged a dangerous flaw there. My resistance was small, but alive. Then Keller spoke to me again. Not about orders, about humanity. "What do you want most?" he asked. "I want it to stop," I whispered. "People are burning everywhere." He nodded, as if expecting that truth. We began helping discreetly. A mechanic, a clerk, a nurse. We acted not to win the war, but to save pieces of the world inside it. Crews, civilians, families we'd never know. But Schmidt saw shadows in me. His brother died in Russia. He wanted punishment to justify the grief. We argued among crates of propellers. "You'll let them burn our cities," he snapped. "And you'll let young men die in machines we know can be safer?" I answered. He left, angry and wounded. Soon his unit deployed east. I hoped he'd find survival, not revenge. Work accelerated. Willow Run now glowed day and night, welding sparks like captured stars. They demanded more efficiency, more output, more miracles. I watched 2 women in the canteen. One held a letter she reread until the paper frayed. The other kept touching a photograph pinned to her chest. Their courage was quiet, unseen, essential. A bomber crew visited once. Their voices shook when they spoke of dead friends. A pilot described being dragged from a burning cockpit. "He smelled like gasoline and fear," he murmured. "I promised I'd carry his name home." Grief made these men older than the calendars allowed. Then news. A raid in Europe had destroyed a town with a river and a church I recognized. Smoke had found my homeland. My aunt lived 2 streets from that steeple. The weight of involvement crushed me. I was building what destroyed the places I once loved. Keller found me late that night. "You chose life," he said quietly. "Hold to that." The next morning, the factory roared as usual. Rivets found their marks. Engines breathed. Humanity tried not to drown in its own inventions. I saw the planes differently. Not as weapons, but as vessels that might save a captured crew, deliver medicine, drop supplies to starving families. Maybe not always, but sometimes they could carry hope. I worked with heavier hands but a clearer conscience. I stopped thinking in terms of nations, only lives. Every small act mattered. A corrected bolt, a safer valve, a message urging mercy. Perhaps it would never change the world. But maybe, just maybe, it could change someone's fate. And that was enough reason to keep going. The winter wind tasted like steel when the loading bay opened. Frost crawled across crates marked for England. God, the cold felt like the Eastern Front, and memory stabbed me again. But inside Willow Run, heat and thunder ruled. Engines roared. Rivet guns hammered. The smell of oil was constant, like a second skin. We were pushing 9 planes a day, and the factory swallowed every hour. Nights and days blurred into metal and sweat. Keller told me a new inspector arrived from Washington. Someone with sharp eyes and sharper suspicion. He watched us like a hawk scanning for weakness. Men joked that he could count rivets by sound alone. He approached me once. "You're the German," he said calmly. "Yes," I replied. "You work harder than anyone here. I owe it to those who fly," I answered. His stare lingered long, searching for treason in my breathing. But he only nodded. Good. Sabotage now meant death. For workers, for families, for an entire fragile trust. So I hid the resistance deeper. No more reckless acts. Only guidance toward safety that I advanced to engine diagnostics. Responsibility. Trust. Danger point one morning. A crew returned from overseas. Their bomber was shredded by cannon fire. The ball turret hangar was empty. Its gunner lost over Bremen. His friends carried his helmet like a ghost. Their pilot addressed the workers. "You saved us," he said. "If this engine failed, we'd be in the channel." He pointed at the serial number. It was mine. My knees nearly buckled. That night, I sat outside as the factory breathed fire into the sky. I thought of the gunner's mother. She wasn't saved. But 3 fathers, 2 brothers, 1 newlywed lived. The war was never simple. Salvation and death rode the same wings. Germany had taken everything from Europe, and Britain, and the defenseless, and my own innocence. If I could keep any more sons alive, then let the engines run. Patton's army needed more B-24s. The inspector pushed speed beyond sanity. Over 98,000 workers rotated shifts, filling the aisles with fatigue. Willow Run became a human river, no one allowed to slow. Joe fell asleep at his station once, drill still spinning in his hand. When he woke, he apologized like a child afraid of punishment. "We're all tired," I said. "Don't let them turn you into a machine." He grinned weakly. Too late. Rumors spread. A captured German agent confessed there were spies inside multiple factories. Fingers pointed. Trust dissolved. Paranoia sharpened every conversation. One afternoon, Keller pulled me aside. "2 men disappeared last week," he whispered. "Arrests. Quiet ones." I swallowed air that suddenly felt too thick. The inspector's glance burned hotter now, not admiration. Calculation. I worked faster. Straighter. Without pause. Fear and duty marched together. I end the cafeteria. A woman collapsed from exhaustion. Her hands still twitched, shaping imaginary rivets. The nurse dragged her away. No one dared stop working. War demanded blood in many forms. Then came the fire. A welding spark leapt onto a crate of treated canvas. Flames crawled up the support beam. Workers screamed. The alarm howled. We formed lines, passed buckets, stamped sparks with boots. But the fire spread like vengeance. Explosions shook the floor as fuel ignited. Smoke ate the ceiling. I ran into the black. Joe was missing. A bad habit of his, helping too much. I found him trapped beneath a beam, coughing blood into his sleeve. His eyes, terrified and pleading. "I can't feel my legs," he gasped. I hauled the beam up. It didn't care. It snapped back down. Panic became a fist around my lungs. I tried again, roar tearing my throat open. The metal shifted. Keller appeared beside me. Together, we dragged Joe into the cold air outside. He clung to me. "Thanks, friend." That word cut the deepest. Fire crews arrived. The blaze died, but not before it took 2 lives and burned 3 aircraft. The inspector confronted the supervisors. If this happens again, men fighting overseas will pay for it. We returned to work the next day. No time to grieve. No room for weakness. War did not mourn. But in the smoking ruin, I found a truth that hardened into bone. I was no longer the man who stepped off the train in chains. That I belonged to the people who pulled friends from fire, not those who threw the world into one. The inspector approached me again later. "You saved a worker today," he said. "One of many?" I replied. That he placed his hand on my shoulder. "I thought I understood this war," he murmured. "But you remind me, it's still about people." His suspicion faded. A fragile peace. Keller examined the new blueprints with me that night. Stronger wings, reinforced bomb racks, life disguised as a weapon. "Can you keep up?" he asked. "I must," I said. The machines groaned alive once more. Sparks flew like stars being hammered into existence. Tomorrow, more planes would rise. More sons would come home who otherwise would not. And I would keep going, not as a spy, not as a traitor, but as a man who had learned the most important lesson of war. Saving lives is the only victory worth fighting for. The snow melted into spring, and the air inside Willow Run turned thick with heat and hope. Production targets climbed to impossible heights. But we weren't machines. We were men and women carrying the war on our backs. By March 1944, Ford pushed us toward a new miracle. One entire B-24 every 59 minutes. An aircraft of 1.5 million parts, rolling out of the line faster than the German army could destroy them. This was America's counteroffensive. Not with bullets, but with bolts. One night, Keller showed me a newspaper headline. "Berlin fears American industry more than bombs." He laughed quietly. I didn't, because it was true. Factories like ours were the real front lines now. Sometimes I stood at the runway and watched the newly built Liberators taxi out. Fresh paint, fresh engines, fresh hope. Then they climbed into the clouds, leaving us behind with the anxiety of questioning. Did we build them well enough? Would those men return home alive? No soldier hears our names, but our fingerprints cling to every rivet that keeps wings attached. Meanwhile, suspicion still hunted in the shadows. The FBI visited every 2 weeks. 2 more workers were taken away, one for careless words, another for reasons we never learned. The inspector always watched. Even when he trusted me, the war didn't point. One day, the factory manager gathered us. "We need volunteers for a special field test. Frontline conditions." Keller nudged me. "That's your chance." They needed someone who understood German aircraft. Someone who knew how a fighter would tear into a bomber's hide. I stepped forward. The test took place near a Michigan base. A B-24 stripped of bombs and ammunition rolled onto a grass field. Engineers placed rows of sandbags around key engine components. P-47 Thunderbolts circled overhead. This was no exhibition. It was planned destruction. We ducked into trenches. The P-47 banked low, guns flashing. Tracers slashed the air. The Liberator's skin peeled open like paper in places. Dead metal that once would have protected beating hearts. Screams echoed inside my skull. Memories of air raid shelters, of dying in darkness while engines whined above us. The test ended. Silence replaced terror. Engineers rushed to examine the damage. I forced myself toward the shredded wing. The inspector joined me. "Well?" he asked. I placed my hand on the torn aluminum. The heat from bullets still lingered. "She held," I whispered. "Enough to fly home." He studied my face, not as a threat anymore, but as a teacher of war. Afterward, I vomited behind a truck. Keller found me shaking. "You're safe," he said. But safety was a myth. My mind still lived in ruins, and the skies still took sons from mothers. Later that month, we received a visit from a pilot recovering from injuries. His group had flown our planes over Ploiești, Operation Tidal Wave, the oil fields of Romania, a slaughterhouse of flames and steel that he walked with a cane, ribs broken inside his jacket. But his voice stood tall. "You may think you're just factory workers," he told us. "But every bomber that comes home is because of you." His eyes found mine. "I flew an engine you worked on," he said. "Did it hold?" I asked. "It brought me back," he answered. Then he placed something in my hand, a cloth patch of his unit's insignia that I stared at the symbol, proud, strong, alive. Suddenly the war wasn't distant. It wasn't strategy or maps. It was the breath in this man's lungs, a breath we had preserved. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into more aircraft. Every time metal rolled off the line, we cheered, not because of numbers, because every plane was one more chance for someone to live. But the demands of war sharpened further. The Pacific needed more long-range formations. Japan's defenses hardened. MacArthur demanded relentless pressure. Willow Run did not sleep. Shift changes resembled a silent battle, thousands pouring in and out, like tides pulled by war's gravity. The cafeteria served 50,000 meals a day. Half of them tasted like fatigue. Joe returned on crutches, his legs healing slowly. He insisted on continuing assembly work. No one argued. We needed him, and he needed purpose. One evening, when storms rattled the factory roof, the power failed. Darkness swallowed everything. But workers didn't stop. We lit lanterns. Men and women built bombers by firelight. No commander ordered it. Patriotism and desperation did. In that flickering glow, faces looked carved from iron. For a moment, we were no longer Americans or Germans. We were human beings trying to end a nightmare. As we worked, I thought of the factories in Germany. Destroyed, dismantled, burning. Men like my father forced into the ground by hunger and thunderous death from above. Here, we built protectors. There, they dug graves. War always chooses a side for you, and I realized mine had already chosen me. Production climbed again. One bomber every 57 minutes. The inspector summoned me one night. "You understand what these numbers mean?" he asked. "They mean the war may end sooner," I replied. He nodded. "And fewer coffins will return home." Then he handed me a piece of paper, my official clearance status restored. My past no longer chained around my throat. "You've earned your place here," he said, and I felt something break inside me, a weight I carried since capture. Freedom didn't always come from victory. Sometimes it arrived through trust. As spring approached its end, Keller suggested we volunteer to ship out as civilian mechanics. Overseas support. Willow Run trained special repair units. If bombers landed damaged in Europe, these teams would fix them near the front. Dangerous work, close to battle, but necessary. Keller grinned at me. "What do you say? Think the skies are ready for us?" My heart beat slower. He didn't know what those skies sounded like in my nightmares, but I couldn't let the fear define the rest of my life. "We go," I said. For once, I was not running from my past, that I was confronting it. One repaired engine at a time, Germany had once ordered me to destroy. Now I chose to rebuild, and that choice made me stronger than any spy could ever be. Orders came quickly. Our deployment would be to England, to bases housing the 8th Air Force. The B-24s built by our hands flew from Michigan across the Atlantic. We would follow them and keep them alive. For the first time since leaving Germany, I was going back toward the war. We boarded a transport ship from New York in early September 1944. Cold wind tore at our jackets as the Statue of Liberty slipped behind the mist. Joe leaned on his cane, breathing hard from the climb up the gangplank. "I never thought I'd cross the ocean again," he said. Neither did I. The ship convoys were heavily guarded. U-boats still prowled these waters. At night, we traveled blacked out. No lights, no smoking on deck, silence sharp as knives. The Atlantic carried too many ghosts. One evening, sirens screamed. The entire ship lurched into sudden turns. Depth charges thundered through the hull. Somewhere below, steel hunters waited. I had once served in the German Navy. Faces of men I knew flickered through my mind. They were now predators beneath us, silent and blind. Joe whispered, "If they hit us, I can't swim." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You won't need to." After half an hour of explosions and tense waiting, the ship steadied. The convoy moved on. The ocean swallowed whatever threat stalked us. War showed mercy that night, but only by chance. Days later, we reached Liverpool. Cold rain greeted us before boots touched British soil. Trucks hauled us to an airfield nearby. Rows of Nissen huts stretched like tin shells across muddy ground. Our sleeping quarters smelled of damp wool and oil. "This isn't Willow Run," Keller joked. "No," I said. "This is real." The first damaged Liberator arrived the next morning. It landed on 3 engines, the fourth a twisted wreck of metal and scorched wires. Yet it flew far enough to return. We rushed out to inspect it. Bullet holes lined its wings. The fuselage was torn open near the waist gunner's window. Blood stained the metal inside. The pilot stepped down, limping. "Fix her," he told us quietly. "She's all we've got." This was not factory work anymore. This was triage. We were mechanics and surgeons. Every bolt mattered. If we failed, men died. I worked alongside Joe, helping him kneel carefully, protecting his injured leg. He forced through the pain without complaint. Keller climbed into the bomb bay, whistling to hide fear. I caught the pilot staring at me with uncertainty. My accent betrayed me, but instead of hostility, he spoke softly. "Doesn't matter where you came from," he said. "Only that you're helping us get home." Acceptance, earned through sweat and responsibility. Not paperwork. As days passed, bomber after bomber rolled in crippled, exhausted, but alive. Torn wing structures, engines coughing black smoke. Landing gear refusing to fully lower. We patched, replaced, reinforced. We never rested long. Night brought constant rumble, departing air raids, returning stragglers. When the sky vibrated with engines, we stopped to count. Who made it back and who didn't? Every empty space from a missing plane felt like an open grave. One morning, the inspector from America arrived unannounced. He wore the same stern expression, but his voice carried respect. "We chose you because you proved yourself," he told me quietly. "Don't forget that." Then he handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter, "For exemplary loyalty and service to the United States." My hands trembled. These words would have condemned me in Germany. Here, they freed me. Keller slapped my back so hard I nearly fell. "You've gone from suspected spy to American hero," he laughed. Not hero, I thought. Just a man trying to correct the past. A week later, a battered Liberator arrived, riddled with holes. The ground crew told us the story. A German fighter had rammed into the bomber midair. The pilot held the controls, barely conscious, dragging the crippled aircraft across the channel. 2 gunners didn't survive. We inspected the impact point. Part of a Luftwaffe fighter still lodged in the wing. A swastika painted on the metal glared at me. Joe muttered, "How can they still do this?" I swallowed hard. The fighter pilot had died too. A young German whose fate was sealed by orders he never chose. War chained us all, just on different ends. One night, while repairing a main spar, I paused. A photo had fallen from the radio compartment, a crew picture. Smiling young men, all confident, all mortal. Joe noticed the silence. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, but inside I wrestled with guilt. Every bomber we repaired killed Germans, people like the boy in that fighter, people like the family I once knew. But if we stopped, thousands of Allied crew would fall instead. Morality was buried beneath necessity. The inspector approached us again. "Command needs faster turnarounds," he said. "Less time on each plane." I stared at him. "They aren't cars," I replied. "If we rush, men die." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Because truth is louder than authority. Winter returned, harsh, wet, unforgiving. We wrapped engines in canvas to keep frost away. Our breath fogged inside our huts. Nights filled with distant thunder. Bombs pounding German cities. Sometimes, I wondered if the house where I grew up still stood, or if rubble had already stolen the memories. Then we received terrible news. Keller collapsed while working. A diagnosis: pneumonia, severe. Medics rushed him away. Joe tightened his fists. "That could have been me," he whispered. War didn't always strike with bullets. Days passed with no update. The airfield felt colder without Keller's laughter. Then finally, he returned on a stretcher, thin and pale, but alive. "Couldn't let you make all the mistakes," he croaked with a grin. We had survived another enemy, February 1945. Something changed. Luftwaffe resistance weakened. More bombers returned undamaged. More crews walked to the mess hall instead of the infirmary. We were winning. We could feel it. One evening, command gathered us in the hangar. Officers stood stiff, expressions grim, but hopeful. "The Reich is collapsing," one said. "Our boys are pushing deep into Germany. The bombing campaign is nearly over." Cheers filled the air. But I felt numb, because the end would bring consequences, not peace. What would happen to me when victory exposed the truth of who I was? Later that night, I sat alone beside a silent bomber, moonlight gleaming across its wings. I placed my palm on its cold metal. "If Germany had built more engines and fewer graves," I whispered, "maybe I would never have been here." I wasn't sure whether I belonged anywhere now. But at least here, I was useful. Here, I helped men return home. Here, I chose to save. One final mission remained. One final sacrifice before the war decided my fate. And that was just the beginning.